Welcome back to another Doctor Who Series 11 episode review. We are at the end of the line, as today I'm going to be taking a look at the series finale of Doctor Who Series 11 episode 10, which is of course the Battle of Ranskoor av Kolos, as written by the brand new head writer, who is of course Chris Chibnall, featuring Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor. Now the past 10 weeks of Doctor Who Series 11, as I've been reviewing them, have been a rather unusual set of weeks indeed. I think that Doctor Who Series 11 in one sentence has simply been a series of Doctor Who that has trial and error, because we've had some absolutely brilliant moments in there, but also at the same time we've had some big massive failures in there as well. And if anything, Doctor Who Series 11 has been a rather big learning curve, and hopefully the writers behind this series will take a little bit of the reaction from the audience and actually put it into the next series, and hopefully over time the next series of the 13th Doctor's adventures will in fact be more powerful and have more impact than the current series that we have had. The 13th Doctor has been rather inconsistent at certain points. We've had lots of different characters thrown into this one personality, but also at the same time I think that it is very clear that the 13th Doctor is a rather eccentric, energetic Doctor that I'm certainly looking forward to seeing more of in the future. But the series finale is one of which that is a very unusual one indeed, simply because it is the series finale of a new series of Doctor Who, and I didn't really have hype whatsoever. When I went into this story, I didn't really see much promotional material. I'm aware that the majority of the episodes from Doctor Who Series 11 have in fact lacked very much on the promotional side of things. They've wanted to keep a lot of the components of the different stories a secret, but the problem with the series finale is that it didn't have the hype behind it. I kind of went into this episode knowing that I was going to come out of the other side not necessarily being completely overwhelmed by the story that I have just witnessed, because at the end of the day this series has in fact been rather mediocre, especially from the alien and villain front, meaning that there was a very high chance that I would come out of this series finale kind of feeling exactly the same thing, however slightly larger and affecting the story a little bit more. However, before I get into the actual episode itself in more detail, I am in fact going to mention something that is a little bit more about the actual channel itself. At the current time of filming, it is 9 o'clock on an evening, which you may be thinking, why am I mentioning this? However, it looks like it is currently daytime, because I've finally forked out some actual money to get some studio lighting. Right above the camera right now, I have a lovely softbox which I've actually bought, and I'm really excited because it means that I can now put more videos out on time, and also I'm going to be able to have more time in my personal life to do things that I want to do. Generally, everything is going to be a little bit better for me, and I hope that the result from this is going to mean I'm going to be able to create more higher quality videos in the future. And it's just a shame that this softbox in fact arrived on the series finale, because I did originally intend to in fact incorporate it into reviews a few weeks back. However, it got lost in the post, meaning that, you know, we need to bring it in at this point. But hey, that doesn't matter. It's good to get a lot of use in the future, and I hope that you appreciate it, because yeah, I spent my actual earnings on that. As per usual, starting off this episode review by taking a look at the production credits for this story. As I was saying earlier, this episode is written by the head writer, Chris Chibnall, which is something that you do come to expect from the series finale. It is almost a new series tradition. I will generally get onto his writing a little bit more in a bit. It must be said, I was a little bit worried about this story, simply down to the fact that he written it, considering that the previous first 5 episodes, except Rosa, were in fact written by him, and they were not necessarily the best, to say the least. Go and check out those reviews if you want more context on that. But yeah, we'll talk about the episode itself in a bit. The episode was once again directed by Jamie Childs, who has been a rather regular director for this series, and I think that it is fair to say that he is probably one of the main benefits of this series that we've had, because he is a great director. He does a very contemporary way of delivering stories. It looks very modern and very effective on camera as well. I think regardless of the quality of the script, it always looks visually stunning, so big massive thumbs up for the directing for this story. And it is nice to have some parallels with what we've seen in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, especially with Tim Shaw in this story. It was quite obvious that a few of the angles are in fact copied from that first story, where we had the close-ups of the face of Jodie to deliver the emotions, and also of Tim Shaw at the same time. The script editor, as per usual, was Fiona McAllister, which I do think that although she's been the same script editor for the entirety of this series, I think that series 12 does need a little bit more editing when it comes to the scripting, so it would be nice to to maybe see that job increased a bit more in the future. A bit more involvement would be nice. The producer for this episode is Alex Mercer. The executive producers are Chris Chibnall, Matt Strevens and Sam Hoyle, and the incidental music has been once again composed by Segan Akinola, which I do believe apparently the current full soundtrack is in fact in production, so I'm very excited to see that released whenever it in fact appears. I do believe probably early 2019, something like that. But once again, his music for this story, I won't bother mentioning it later on, I may as well mention it now because I'll talk about the narrative in a little bit. I think that his music was nice throughout this story. It once again rather atmospheric. There wasn't really too many iconic pieces of music. However, it was nice to see the 13th Doctor's score, a few more sort of notes in there. And then we also had Tim Shaw's kind of theme in there as well that is very daunting, very menacing. Sadly, unlike the character, which I will be getting onto in a little bit. So now moving on to the characters for this episode, starting off where we normally do with the 13th Doctor as portrayed by Jodie Whittaker. Now I may do a video at some point actually discussing what we have seen so far with the 13th Doctor. Who knows, that may happen. However, I have delivered my opinions throughout each episode review so far, and I do think that she was once again a nice Doctor throughout this story. As I say, we've seen that eccentric side of her, very energetic, but it was also nice to see her interact with a villain that we've already seen before throughout this series, almost like she has a relationship with that character already, because due to Series 11 not including any reoccurring villains from the previous series of the show, we've of course not had that. So it is nice to see the 13th Doctor almost have some history with a character, but at the same time I do think some of the moments in this story were a little bit lacking. I think that one of the highlights for me was the interaction between the 13th Doctor and Graham, especially in the scene where he says that he wants to talk to her in private, and we have that wonderful moment where he actually realises that they're going to meet Tim Shaw once again. He of course previously killed Grace, therefore he wants to kill him, and we had a really intense interaction between the two, saying that essentially their relationship could be on the line if he decides to go ahead and kill Tim Shaw, which I really like that scene. I thought that Jodie delivered that quite well also. It felt intense, it also felt like she had a serious side to her, and I think that is certainly something that I want to see more of in the later series. I want to see that happy, eccentric side, but also within a second her flip to this serious character that you need to trust, otherwise she may do something bad. I think that is a thing with the 13th Doctor. She's almost a little bit unpredictable so far, but I do want to see more consistency in her next season. Moving on to the companions for this episode, I'm going to start with Mandip Gill, who does of course play Yasmin Khan. We had some earlier stuff in this series where I didn't really enjoy her character too much, simply because she didn't have too much to do. And then when we had more writers coming into the series, she started to get a little bit more limelight. All of the characters seemed to have equal input throughout the story. Episodes such as Demons of the Punjab completely focused around her character, and of course Kablam also nicely contributed to each of the characters and their different personalities. This episode, funny enough, is also written by Chris Chibnall and has exactly the same flaws that I felt had in the early half of this series that were also written by Chibnall, where he doesn't particularly know how to use all of the characters at once. It kind of felt like we didn't have much development between all of the companions in this episode, and once again Yasmin kind of fell victim to that because she didn't have much to do. And the one compliment that I do in fact give Yaz for this story is that she had some nice moments in the later half of this episode. It was nice, it was good to see her actually have more of a relationship with the 13th Doctor, and she was certainly better, as I say, in the later act as opposed to the first half. And then we have Ryan and Graham. I'm kind of going to bubble them into one thing because they did spend the majority of this story together, which I do think was certainly a good move for this story, considering that they've both experienced the same loss as each other. Of course, the overarching theme of Grace that has been put into the majority of the stories this series, even though we weren't meant to have an actual plot arc or anything like that, but hey, we will sort of ignore that. I do think that both of the characters throughout this story were nice, they were quite enjoyable. I certainly like Ryan a little bit more than Graham. Also had some brilliant moments throughout this story. He had some really enjoyable, quirky lines in there as well. I love the moment where he said something like, Grace enjoyed being alive, she was good at that. I thought there was just something about that that was incredibly sarcastic but funny at the same time. As I said, two rather warm characters, and I think that the one thing to take from Doctor Who Series 11 is in the next series, I'd maybe like to see a few episodes, say one with the 13th Doctor and Yaz by themselves, then one with the 13th Doctor and and Graham and Ryan together, or maybe even just Graham or just Ryan. Maybe just give them a few stories where they only have one Doctor and one companion in order to develop them a little bit further. I just would find that that would be beneficial for everybody in the entire TARDIS team, because so far I'm not seeing that type bond or relationship. It is forced into the script, however I'm just not seeing it naturally yet. And then moving on to the other characters for this story, considering it is a series finale, there isn't really too many people to talk about. We have Phyllis Logan, who plays Andino, we have Mark Addy, who plays Paltraki, we have Purcell Ascot, who plays Delph, who is the second one of the Ox in this story, or the Ux, however you want to pronounce it. We have Samuel Oatley returning as Tim Shaw, and then we have Jan Lee, who plays Yu Sam. I generally think that the Ux were an interesting concept. I like the idea of them being able to change the fabric of the dimensions of space or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact technobabble, but I thought they were cool, interesting kind of creatures or aliens, and it was nice to see some more aliens in Doctor Who, because the last time that we in fact seen an interesting race would have probably been in the Saranga conundrum, which those were kind of descendants from Earth. Of course, this species is also quite humanoid, so it was nice to have them in the episode. And then we have, I'm just going to get onto him now because I can't actually not sort of ignore him any longer, Tim Shaw. Tim Shaw. Basically, I'm not going to say anything, I am just going to put in a clip from the previous episode review that went up before this episode aired, and it basically explains the opinion that I came out of this story with. Next up, we're going to be having this series finale, which is of course a rather interesting looking episode. In the Next Time trailer, we have the Doctor saying, "I recognise that voice," so I'm just hoping, fingers crossed, that that is actually a villain that we've seen before Doctor Who Series 11, because quite frankly, if it's anybody that we have seen in Series 11 so far, there's not really been anybody that I've actually cared about that much to actually see return in order to have that shock horror effect. So who knows, maybe Chris Chibnall might bring back a classic villain for a big final surprise or something like that. The reason that I wanted to put that clip in there is simply because, as I said, that video was filmed before this actual episode aired. It was uploaded to YouTube before the series finale aired also, and basically it summarises what I didn't want to see throughout this story, and we had the return of a Series 11 character. In that review I did also refer to Tim Shaw as being a rather underdeveloped monster. It was something of which that I did cover in the Woman Who Fell to Earth review. He was certainly a character that slipped into the background, and the Doctor was the main attention for that story, which is absolutely fine because it's that Doctor's debut. It is something that you come to expect. However, when you have that character returning for the series finale, you instantly have a little bit of a flaw in there. I must admit, on rewatch, I did in fact find Tim Shaw a enjoyable-ish character for this episode. However, I kind of feel like there wasn't that sort of powerful character that we were meant to feel at the very start of this story. When his voice came over the tannoy and the Doctor looked scared along with the companions, I didn't really feel any of that terror. I wasn't scared for them. That frankly didn't make impact in the first story, and here it is returning again, and chances are it's not going to make much impact in this episode either. Of course, he did kill one person, which is lovely, within the first few seconds, which makes him kind of feel quite evil, which is good. I did like that part of his character. I also love the fact that he wanted to seek revenge on the Doctor simply because she essentially doomed him to never being able to be the leader of his species at the very end of The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and of course because of this he wants to annihilate the Earth basically and terminate its existence. Much like with every single new series Doctor Who final, the Earth is always at threat, and I feel like this story doesn't really do much with a unique identity. I feel like the threat of this episode has been used time and time again, and Tim Shaw, as I say, is a villain who it was lovely to see him back, I suppose, but the fact that I wanted a reoccurring villain before I even went into this episode, I wanted something from the previous series of Doctor Who, and we didn't really get that. Therefore, I'm naturally not going to like this episode as much, simply because it's not something that I wanted from the very beginning. There's also a rather unusual quote that is used by Tim Shaw in this story, where he refers to the Doctor as having a puny mind, and I felt that that was really unusual because the Doctor is a Time Lord, a rather powerful species, arguably one of the most powerful in the universe, and yet Tim Shaw kind of thinks that he knows better. Obviously because he is the villain, he is going to think that he is amazing and has a lot of power, but at the end of the day, I don't even think the Daleks or the Cybermen would refer to the Doctor as having a puny mind. Tim Shaw actually thinks that he is going to be able to defeat the Doctor with his silly little gun thing, or whatever he used, his laser, to try and take out the Earth, and he actually thinks he is going to win, and he does that trademark stupid line of something like, "Nothing can stop me now," and I just thought Chibnall was using the basic outline of a comic book monster story, because the hero needs to save the day, and that was very inevitable at the very end of this episode, and it was very intriguing to see Graham actually not go ahead and kill Tim Shaw at the very end. Of course, he did have a period of time to actually consider what he was going to do throughout this story, because I think that when it first implanted that idea that he wanted to kill him in the early half, then it kind of made sense that it was going to use it at the very end of this story, and it almost got to the point where I was interested to see what actually would happen if Graham did go ahead and kill Tim Shaw. What would have happened? Would the Doctor have just dumped him back on Earth and not really said anything else? I would have liked to see the 13th Doctor almost crack a little bit and have a little bit of an argument with one of her companions. I think one of the key moments of this story that absolutely everybody was waiting for was that moment that Tim Shaw came over the actual transmission, and you've seen the helmet coming into the forefront, and then you had the realisation from the Doctor and the companions that Tim Shaw was back, and I think that moment was rather intense. It had a lot of suspense behind it, and it actually kind of felt like Tim Shaw was a little bit of a threat. However, unfortunately, the more that he was in different scenes, the weaker his character actually seemed to be, and the less of a threat he became throughout the duration of the actual story. And that was certainly very relevant in his very last scene of this episode, where he is literally shot in the leg by Graham and he falls on the floor, and then he is put in the stasis chamber. To me, that is not what an arch-villain that would be the main alien of the series would actually do. As much as I kind of like the idea of the villain from episode 1 that essentially started out this era returning to wrap up the series essentially, I do like that. However, at the same time, it kind of just felt like an everyday villain that didn't really have too much power or even that much threat behind him. I feel like they're going to make him return in Series 12. I feel like he's going to be a character that is going to be like the arch-villain for the 13th Doctor. Yeah, I didn't see it in episode 1. I've not seen it in the series finale, therefore the chances of me seeing it in the future isn't going to be much chance either. I think that he almost needs to team up with another species in order to actually have any emphasis behind him, because at the minute he's just basically a cardboard cutout standard villain. I got another cup of tea because I noticed that when I'm filming reviews and I get a little bit frustrated, I drink my tea a little bit quicker, so this is now the second cup. But of course, Tim Shaw does also have the lovely idea to steal planets throughout this story. He does steal a grand total of 5, and then of course the Earth will be the 6th, or he wants to destroy it or something like that. He's basically using the planets as a power source, I do believe. I kind of phased out, I must admit, at that point in the actual story. Of course, this is the second series finale where we've had a character or villain stealing planets. We had exactly the same thing in Journey's End, which was also referred to throughout this story, and I just kind of feel like for an actual final to a series, it lacked in substance. It didn't really have too much to do. It almost dragged a little bit in the middle half because it didn't really know what to do with its time. Of course, we had the return of the androids from the Ghost Monument, which were a rather interesting character to come back. Of course, once again, they don't actually say anything because they don't actually have any lines. They're just kind of a robotic monster that shoot things, and we have that link to the Ghost Monument, even with the Doctor actually referencing the TARDIS as the Ghost Monument in the actual story. And I kind of think it would have made sense for the rag creatures, I think they were called the Remnants, I want to say. I think it would have made sense for the rag things from the Ghost Monument to come back, maybe have a reference to the Timeless Child, if that's even going to be a plot arc that is going to be used throughout later series. But I just kind of feel maybe having that involvement with the Ghost Monument and the development of chemical weapons to be used in warfare by the Stenza, and then bringing that into this story would have made a lot of sense. I kind of feel like that was left out of the story. Maybe it was in an earlier draft and then Chris Chibnall has decided to leave it for a later series or something like that. I feel like this whole plot arc doesn't really deserve to exist. I think that the one thing that I can give credit to the earlier series from Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat is the actual series finales did feel like a series finale finale. For me, Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways is probably the best series finale that we've seen throughout the new series, and to be honest, Series 2's final is also probably quite a decent one to end on also, and each one feels like a climax. And even the Moffat era, as much as I didn't really like Hellbent, and as much as I didn't really like The Wedding of River Song, I kind of still feel that they were more a justified climax to a whole series worth of plot arcs, rather than this episode that didn't really have a plot arc to begin with. It just kind of needed to fill up a story and give it some plot behind it. I love the idea of Tim Shaw creating this weapon, and other planets kind of wanted to stop him, and every time they've came to this planet in order to stop him, they've been shot down. It does once again kind of make Tim Shaw feel like a threat. However, all of that was off camera, and I feel like that would have almost been something good to bring into this story. Maybe even starting this episode with a battle conflict scene, considering that it's called the Battle of Ranskoor of Kolos. It incredibly lacked in actual battle scenes, so it would have been nice to maybe have a battle there at the beginning, seeing Tim Shaw almost fight and wipe out these other species, and then he becomes more of a threat. It was also nice to see a little bit more of the TARDIS console throughout this story, because that is something that, once again, considering that we've got a new set, we've not really seen too much of it throughout this series. And I would certainly like an episode with more scenes in the TARDIS, or at least maybe even set in the TARDIS in Doctor Who Series 12, because it is a rather interesting set. I want to see more of it. At the minute, we've had 10 episodes, and I kind of feel like we've not even seen enough of it for me to form an actual opinion of it. It seems quite dark and dingy, however, also at the same time, it has a life behind it. Of course, it's got a lot of crystals, and yeah, I just want to see more of the actual TARDIS console, maybe in Resolution, or even in Doctor Who Series 12 that we now know is going to be coming out in 2020, which is a whole, well, over a year away, which is probably a bad move, but hey, probably that's a whole video of conversation that we could have in the future. On to what I actually noticed throughout this story, which has been a reoccurring theme once again throughout this series, is the amount of exposition throughout the actual plot itself, and the narrative and the vocabulary, what the actual characters say. And it especially comes from the companions, and even from the Doctor in some scenes as well, such as the moment where you have the 13th Doctor actually meeting Tim Shaw again for the first ever time when they come face to face. You essentially have a few lines that are basically just reeling off the plot of the woman who fell to earth. Oh, the last time I seen you was here. I put these things in your body, and then you ended up basically exploding and dying, and now you are ill, and it's all my fault. And then Tim Shaw basically says exactly the same thing back. It just updates you on all of the events from the previous episodes that have ran up to this point, which I get. If you're somebody who are not a regular viewer of the series, if you're somebody that is new to this episode and hasn't seen episode 1, that is undoubtedly very helpful. However, at the same time, for those people that are the more consistent viewers, and more so the actual fans themselves, it is very obvious, and the actual dialogue itself is incredibly jarring. And I do think that what would be nice to be seen incorporated into later seasons is a little bit more of belief in the actual viewers, that they've seen the previous stories and have actual knowledge and know what is going on, because I kind of feel that new series Doctor Who has the reputation of treating the viewers like they're not necessarily very intelligent. They can't really remember the previous stories, and I think that the sort of exposition of the previous scripts and previous episodes should kind of be let out in order to let the episodes actually feel a little bit more natural. One of the main things, as I said, to take from Series 11 that I did mention literally within the first minute of this review is that I feel that this series almost set up the foundations of the next series, and I hope that Doctor Who Series 12 is a lot more powerful in its approach, and I think that the writers have certainly learned what works and what doesn't, especially when it comes to the Doctor herself. I'm expecting a much more developed version of the 13th Doctor in the later episodes, but also at the same time, now that we kind of have that wrapping up of the Grace plot, of course, that Graham and Ryan will never forget that she is dead, but I kind of feel that they now have this closure that Tim Shaw is locked away. They might be able to move on as people, and possibly we won't be able to have those constant references back to Grace, and they're going to be able to continue their lives and actually go on to do more things. And I think that Series 12 will hopefully actually make room for that and show the characters actually develop as people. So I do essentially see Series 11 as the foundations, the opening chapter, Doctor, and I just hope that Series 12 is almost the middle chapter of that, and maybe even the series after is kind of the resolution, so to speak, and we have the ending of those characters. Maybe they go their different ways, maybe one ends up dead, but I do certainly think that Chris Chibnall does have potential to actually develop as a writer and do more interesting episodes. Just at the minute he's playing it incredibly safe, arguably too safe, and it's not satisfying kind of the key fans of Doctor Who that have watched the show for many years. However, it may be enticing in those new audiences that haven't seen the series before, which I suppose is good. But then you hit the issue that Doctor Who isn't on in 2019, which a lot of people believe, much like myself, that an extra year will benefit the development of the scripts from Series 12, which is one way to look at it. They've got a longer time to produce the stories, longer time to edit the actual scripts and produce the actual story. However, equally at the same time, those new viewers that you've dragged in this series and have generated the hype from are kind of going to fade away over the next year, and ideally we should have had Series 12 in 2019 a little bit earlier, and then we wouldn't have that big break that we had between Series 10 and Series 11 beginning, because it shows that the show does in fact suffer if it is off air for a long time. So I think that if anything, yes, maybe having less episodes in 2019 should have been an option, maybe only having 5, maybe or even 3 episodes that are essentially a 3-parter, one big plot in the mid area of 2019 just to keep the series ticking over, and then essentially having the remaining episodes in 2020, or even extending the actual series itself to a whole 15 episodes long and having 5 episodes in 2019, the following 10 episodes in the next year being 2020. That might have been a better way to approach this series, instead of just having one random episode that may or may not include the Daleks kind of floating about in the middle of nowhere, not in Series 11 and kind of not in Series 12 either, because it means that the next episode can kind of have a cliffhanger behind it, but it is literally going to be a long time until it's resolved. No pun intended. So overall, that is really it for my Doctor Who Series 11 episode review of the series finale, The Battle of Ranskoor of Kolos. I think that generally overall, this is a nice, entertaining kind of story for the new viewers to Doctor Who. It is a slow burner for a series finale and kind of lacks in that substance that you come to expect from previous series finales that we've had throughout the new series. One of the main problems of this episode is essentially the foundations of this story is based in previous episodes and naturally a little bit mediocre in themselves, leading to a rather mediocre series finale. You essentially can't make something amazing after some previous plot points that weren't already amazing as it is. You need a powerful setup and a powerful ending in order to make it work, and that story doesn't in fact have that. I suppose a positive way of looking at it is we're only 10 episodes into the 13th Doctor era, and as long as Jodie Whittaker doesn't go away from Doctor Who anytime soon, we have a lot more adventures with the 13th Doctor to look forward to, even if they are in 2020. So that is really it for this Doctor Who Series 11 episode review. I hope you have enjoyed it. What has been your general opinion of this story? Did you disagree with what I've said? Did you agree? Did you enjoy the Battle of Ranskoor of Kolos? Do you find the name confusing? I certainly bloody do. It was really a big pain to say throughout the entirety of this video. And I guess if you haven't checked out my previous Doctor Who Series 11 episode reviews, then I certainly recommend doing so in order to find out my individual opinions for each story. I've done a review for each episode in a very similar format to this one, and I guess that is it for TV episodes for this year. Join me in my next Doctor Who new series review as I'll be taking a look at the New Year's Day special that will be airing on January the 1st, 2019, which is of course entitled Resolution and possibly featuring the return of one of Doctor Who's arch-villains, which does seem rather intriguing, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the episode will be good, considering that it is essentially the only one that we're getting next year. Other than that, of course, check out also my other Series 11 episode reviews of the brand new books in order to see the new companions and the new Doctor in an entirely different format to the TV show itself, and also check out my Doctor Who product reviews as well as Big Finish and everything else that I do on this channel. Of course, with Doctor Who being off air, that isn't an issue, as there is a lot more Doctor Who in the wider universe to look forward to next year as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and I shall see you all in more Doctor Who content in the near future. Bye for now. And that's Series 11 done. Yay!